This garden is less than 2 years old. This right here is my grocery road garden. And despite less than ideal weather, the occasional wandering cow, pests, drought, and flood, it looks pretty good. And today, I'm gonna take you on a tour and show you what's going on. We have 8 4-foot wide beds with 3-foot wide pathways. And at this time in summer, everything is kind of getting ridiculous in here. The mulberries have pretty much ceased producing except for the occasional late mulberry. The cannas are getting gigantic and we're ready to cut and drop them as mulch on the rows. The sweet potatoes are starting to spread into the pathways. The Everglades tomatoes are doing the same thing. The watermelons are starting to run. Everything is just getting pretty wild in here. And the cassava has come back from the ground and is well on its way to reaching its height for the year. It's at 6 foot. It often gets to be 10 to 12 foot by the end of the season, and then it's time to harvest it. This one came back from last year. It's got some pretty good sized roots here beneath the ground. These ought to be pretty big by the end of the year when we pull them out right before the freezes. We had some random animal damage here and there where gaps got opened that shouldn't really be here, or seedlings or transplants we put in that are just simply gone. There shouldn't really be many gaps at this time of year, but some things have gotten killed repeatedly. I'm not really sure why. I stuck in some new sweet potato slips in a couple of locations, went out of town for a few days, and I came back and they were just cut off and shredded, and some of them were completely pulled out of the ground, and I have no idea what did it. It might have been rabbits, because I've seen some wild rabbits around here. It might have been ducks, because we definitely have ducks around here, but we don't really know. Could be anything. Probably need a game cam out here. I don't know. These are the Musa Bajju fiber banana from Japan. This is a non-edible variety of banana that we're testing out to see how cold hardy it really is. Apparently it's supposed to be cold hardy to about zone 6 and we're zone 8B. This is a good source of biomass. It's got a lot of water in it, so you can chop it up and lay it on the ground around your transplants and let it rot down and make the ground spongy. And you can also feed them to pigs. So I'm growing them just to see. They're also very pretty, and it's nice to have that little tropical look in this area. Though they don't necessarily need to be in the food garden. I like it because it reminds me of the tropics. Sugarcane is coming up right here. They're coming in. I've got about 7 or 8 varieties of sugarcane now. I've got green ones and red ones. I have a black one. I have one that's almost yellow-green. I got some striped ones. So we'll see what they are when they actually make canes, because I just planted a whole bunch of canes in the ground here and there, and I don't know what they are until they start to get their color on later in the season. Those we don't really harvest until November. This was a white mulberry right here that had some pretty good fruits on it. I don't know what variety it is. They weren't particularly large white mulberries. When we moved, we transplanted a lot of things and kind of lost track of what they were. This is the Rachel mulberry right here on the end. And all of this is ready to be pruned because we are almost at the solstice right now. Might even be the solstice by the time this video gets put up. But when you cut back at this time of year, it reduces the vigor of the trees and keeps them small. And these are getting so big that they could just completely shade this entire area out and, you know, get 25 or 30 feet tall, and that would not be good for this space. They really need to be cleaned up. But when we do turn around and clean them up, we can take them and throw them on the ground to build the soil, so all those prunings and leaves can go back into the soil and build it up. And this is a good time of year to do that. We just kind of throw it in between all of the watermelons and everything that are growing, and it'll give us a little more light for the watermelon vines too. You can see the melons are starting to make melons, and there's a whole bunch of variety. There's a little one right here too that has stripes on it. There's ones that are almost white and ones that are almost black and ones with stripes. This is all part of Ezekiel's landrace watermelons, which he has been doing now for something like, it's got to be about 5 years. He's been crossing them, maybe 6 years. But this current set of crosses, I think, is about, this would be the 3rd season. Speaking of crosses, there's some of our landrace cucumbers here, which he grew as a ground cover. We've already picked some cucumbers, and we're letting some of them now blow up into blimps for next year's seed supply. So they'll get real big, make a big yellow melon basically, and then we just got to let them sit there and sit there and sit there, and then the whole vine will die out, and then we'll harvest them for the seeds and we'll plant them again. We had multiple varieties of pickling cucumber all mixed together, and they've become a vigorous ground cover. We never trellised them. They've kind of gotten adapted to growing in half shade and growing various, mostly pickling looking cucumbers. It's kind of our adaptation of a bunch of different varieties to this area, and we're on our, this will be our 3rd year of these, I think. They've done pretty well. Let's go and check out the next row. So there being 8 beds here, that means there are 7 pathways in between. So we are on the 2nd pathway, which is actually beds 2 and 3. And these cannas, really just a great biomass producer. We can cut them repeatedly through the season. We got some good rain this week. That's when you want to drop your mulch, after you have a good rain. These are going to go around this loquat tree and feed the soil up here. And this is less mulch that we have to bring in from somewhere else. So if I was just counting on some tree company to come and bring me wood chips and that sort of thing, that's not necessarily consistent. When I was at my mom's this last week, I stopped some guys by the side of the road, told them I'd give them 20 bucks if they dropped their load of chips, and they said, no problem, we'd be happy to drop it. And they took the address, and it was like literally less than half a mile, and they never showed up. So, you know, you just grow your own mulch. You don't have to worry about that sort of thing. You've already got it here. You plant a whole bunch of biomass stuff in kind of waste spaces. It makes even more sense. I usually grow some in here, and then I grow some out in the yard. We've got more cassava right here. And on the other side, I have these goji berries. Now, goji berries are regularly fruiting for Sam down at Scrubland Farms in North Central Florida. And we're still, I mean, we're pretty much at the bottom of their range here. And he's just a little bit further down at the bottom of the range. And so there's no reason why these shouldn't be fruiting, but we've had them for a few years now, and they just kind of don't do anything. And I'm not sure why. They look healthy, they put on a ton of blooms, and they don't make any fruit. So if these don't make fruit this next spring, I'm probably going to just yank them out and replace them with something more productive. I really like goji berry fruit, and I had it fruit for me before when I was further south of here, but they're not doing it here, and I'm not sure why. But they bloom repeatedly, and we just simply don't get fruit. So if it gets too unproductive, it's going to get out of here. This is a seedling plum. Started this from a seed. It's looking pretty good. Probably will fruit in the next year or two, but I've got to prune it out of here again, kind of clean it up a little bit, give us some space. Got a little bit of tobacco here. I put some transplants in here, but I also got some that self-seeded, so that's kind of cool. Maybe it'll be kind of a landrace tobacco and start itself repeatedly, become a weed in my yard. And one day I'll quit smoking cigars and I'll be like, why are these things keep coming up? They're just taunting me. This is Rosa rugosa, the rose hip rose. There are some rose hips on one of these. It's blooming repeatedly and putting on little fat rose hips that we can make tinctures out of, or jams, or dry them. This is jack bean, also known as sword bean, also known as Jack and the Beanstalk bean. I stuck a few of them in here. I got them from Randall at Flomaton Famous and his wife Michelle, and I just stuck a couple seeds in here, and they're just kind of wandering around and doing their thing. Here's our Everglades tomatoes. They always show up. They self-seed. They make lots and lots of little tomatoes. They're just everywhere. Sometime in the middle of summer, they tend to die back and the disease starts to take them a bit. And then they usually come back again in the fall for another round. Little apple tree here. My wife planted that one. Chestnut. Chestnut has more cannas growing around it for this very reason. And then the sweet potato ground cover here with some galangal ginger. And then we've got some sort of pepper here. I'm not sure which one it is. I started a whole bunch of peppers and they haven't all started making peppers yet. They're just kind of getting started now. Beautiful sugar cane. Beautiful cassava. We have some of our purple-headed amaranth right here. The leaves on these are edible. The bugs like to actually eat them. Occasionally the entire head breaks off when you're doing a demonstration. But you can just go like this. Get the little seeds and little caterpillars too. Caterpillars. And those seeds, wherever they drop, you end up with lots more amaranth. It's a pretty good green, but it's pretty high in oxalic acid. So don't eat it very often, but it's really nice. Sauteed in a little bit of lard and cooked in with scrambled eggs with breakfast. That is if the bugs don't get it. This is supposed to be an Illinois everbearing mulberry, but I'm not convinced that it is. It got really tall really fast, and then it got blown over in a big windstorm, and then we propped it back up and tied it here, so now it's kind of an umbrella across the path. And it looks sort of cool. And it's making some fruit. That one's a little bit underripe, but my wife can eat it anyways. Tell me if it's any good. Is it way underripe? If you eat them when they're too underripe, you'll hallucinate. No, you won't. Yes.
What?
Here, there's one. That one's definitely not underripe. Just eat it. Is that one better? Mm-hmm. It's good fruit. Didn't make a lot of them though. I've got some sort of tomato I stuck in here. It's one of those disease-resistant varieties, and I think that being in the shade here is helping it. It looks pretty happy. Maybe we'll get some tomatoes out of the pathway before the bugs get them all, but I'm convinced now that tomatoes are better in the greenhouse, other than the Everglades, which don't mind it out here. These are Dioscaria polystachya, the Chinese yam. This is a really pretty yam. It's known to be invasive in some climates because it'll grow and it makes all these little aerial roots. And these little aerial roots can then drop on the ground at the end of the year and make more plants. So if this thing is growing in the woods, this could be a problem because they could drop all over the ground and bounce all over the place, and everywhere they drop, they get covered with some leaves and a little bit of leaf mold or whatever, and they come back the next year and they make a whole bunch of plants. So literally these things make hundreds of these little bulbils, which then spring up everywhere and cause all kinds of yams to show up. But they're edible. The bulbils are edible. The roots are edible, and it's not particularly that invasive here. It seems it's done very well in our garden, and it's been pretty well behaved. We get the occasional stray seedling, but they give us a lot of little bulbils, and they're really nice when you cook them with a little butter and salt and saute them in a pan like little bitty potato fries. They're just really coming in now. More watermelons. Getting some figs right here. I don't have any fancy figs that I know of. I usually have Celeste or brown turkey or something. I have no idea what this fig is. We might be able to find out what it is when the fruit actually matures a bit, but I'm not sure at this point. We put some irises in down at the end just because they're beautiful, and we put the irises next to our fruit trees. I get a bunch of bulbs and various things and just stick them all over the place. Anywhere there's a gap, This is how we do companion planting. We just throw a whole bunch of stuff together and let God sort it out. If it lives and it likes it here, it gets to stay, if it's not too much of a pain in the neck. This trellis has Chinese yam on it, that's Dioscorea polystachya. It has the edible Dioscorea bulbifera, which is just starting to make bulbils now. Those don't come in until later. And it also has Apios americana, the American groundnut, which is a good variety I got from Leo Miranda Castro, planted down at the base here, and it is running and looking pretty good. So we've got a few different, we've got 2 roots that grow in the ground, and we have 1 root that grows on the vine, and that's the Dioscorea bulbifera. It's a little thin on this side. I don't know why. I stick vines in here and there, but sometimes some things just don't take. And it's not quite as thick on this as it was last year, but it's doing its best. We've got many more watermelons down through here, and then we kind of are coming into some craziness. This is taro. It's starting to be unhappy with how hot it's been getting. This is an Elaeagnus. It's a nitrogen fixer. It makes small edible fruit. Put it in here because it's pretty. Fixes nitrogen. If it gets bigger, I'll cut it back. This is a very nice white mulberry from Burnt Ridge Nursery, which you can buy from online. Burnt Ridge Nursery, they have some cool stuff. This is a ivory white mulberry, which makes a nice, large, white, very sweet mulberry, non-staining. So if you had a small yard and you're afraid of having purple everywhere, all over a sidewalk or something, just plant one of these instead. White mulberry, tastes like honey. It's very nice. But it needs to be pruned, and it's taking over the path right now. These are some of our Rosa rugosa here on the other side, and you can see what the actual rose hips look like here. They're actually very pretty and kind of just attractive as a fruit. So these guys here are what we're going to be using for the first time this year. This has been in the ground for less than 2 years here, but a year at our other location at least. This is the first time it's really decided to make rose hips. We have a few of these scattered here and there. This is something I'd like to add to our food forest as well, because it fills in, it's pretty, it's a nice shrub, it kind of fits in, and it makes a useful fruit as well as being pretty. Not the most productive thing in the world, but I'm kind of a sucker for roses. Our cucumbers have been pretty productive this year, but not like last year. We've gotten about 30 pounds this year, and I'm pretty much just saving the rest for seed. We planted them a few times. It got cold again, and then it got warm again, and then it got kind of droughty, and just stuff didn't really take off like I expected. So there's not as many. I planted them in here. I planted a bunch of them in here, and probably, you know, 1/10 of what I planted came up, and that's still enough to give us 30 pounds of cucumbers so far. This is sorrel, known as Jamaican sorrel, or known as Florida cranberry. It'll fruit later in the year, and you'll get to see that. It becomes a big pretty bush with a useful edible calyx that you can use just like cranberries, because cranberries don't grow here. We can grow that instead. This is an interesting bulbifera. This is a purple variety of Dioscorea bulbifera. Grower Jim told me about it. Grower Jim is down in Orlando. He has a rare nursery, and he's got all kinds of interesting things. And this is one that he told me about that I was able to get. We'll see how it does. I've never grown it before. It's very pretty so far. I like the purple on the leaves. We've got another fig here that's producing. This is a black walnut that started itself in here because we had a walnut tree in here before, and I'm gonna let it just grow this year and then dig it up as a bare root later. Maybe plant it out later, because we don't want a black walnut in the middle of here. That's not a good idea. Got a lot of stuff to walk through over here. Watermelons, thornless blackberries that are completely crossing the pathway. These kind of need to be pushed back and maybe tied up a little bit. More beautiful sugarcane. Got a big sunflower right here with a massive head on it. Look at this boss. That is a gigantic sunflower. That is just a boss sunflower. I love it. And this peach here, really starting to come in this year. It needs a prune back before it gets way out of sight. It's probably 14 feet now. That's a little too much for in here. I am tempted to lop it up from below and actually raise it up so it's over our heads and see if I can get it to just fruit high up and perhaps cast a little more shade in here through the summer instead of trying to make it a short bush, possibly grow it high. And then I could grow things around the base of it that would get sunlight around as the sun passes by during the day. Just an experiment I've been thinking about. Maybe not pruning all the trees down short to head height, but actually letting some of them get 12, 15 feet tall and pruning them up the sides so the light comes around them during the day, and you would be getting food at 12 feet, and then you could have some vines running up it, and then you could have some shrubs underneath, and you could still have your vegetables underneath. Instead of making a bush that takes up this much space, you have a trunk that takes up this much space that you can grow more around. Plus you get that sunlight going across and casting light differently. That could be a very interesting experiment. I don't really know what I'm doing with taro. I used to kind of know how to grow it down in the tropics, but we have a short season for it. So I'm gonna try next year taking some of these pieces in here and making tight little cuts on them and putting them out the way they do in Hawaii, and see if I can actually start it really early in the year and put them out here so I can get decent roots. Last year's root that was in the center here rotted out, and that could have been the root that we ate. We just haven't really figured out our timing on this yet. They do add a beautiful touch of the tropics to the area, though. We've got the tropics right next to the temperate zone because right here are the Jerusalem artichokes. This bed is mostly full of them. If you remember, I did a video on Jerusalem artichokes and why I'm planting them, even though I don't like to eat them. This is animal food for later. They make a lot of tops that the cows can eat, and they make a lot of roots that the cows and the pigs can eat. And I wanted to just propagate out this variety that did well for us. We planted a few different varieties. This particular one made a lot of roots last year on a few plants. So I'm figuring, you know, getting a few 100 pounds of these things that we could feed to animals during the season when things are just not in could be very useful. So even if we don't eat it, the animals can eat it. I also have arrowroot in here, which is a really cool crop. Arrowroot has edible roots, as you would expect. Pointed, edible, pointed roots. This is only the second year we've had these in here. This was a little plant. It's starting to spread, and it's getting so I could probably pull it up and pull some roots this fall, and then I could divide this all up and plant some of it out further. But they're very pretty, and they add a touch of the tropics, and they do survive here in Zone 8B. So I like them a lot. They're not like one of our main staple roots, but they could be maybe if we worked at it a little bit. They're just, right now they're just sort of a novelty that's cool to have because they're pretty. I stuck in a few eggplants here and there. Some of them are not that happy. Like this eggplant is not a very pretty eggplant. This is a sad looking eggplant. And there's a somewhat sad looking pepper right here. I don't know why they're yellowy, but I have a batch of swamp water going in the back that I'm gonna start applying to some of the sadder looking plants. We have some turmeric right here by this fig. So a fig and turmeric and daylilies and goji berries and watermelons and yams all sharing a space right here. I just really like the strange interactions that we get, like this sunflower that I showed you from the other side. Rachel just pointed out that it's got little Dioscorea alata yams growing on it, and behind it has an Everglades tomato. So there's just this kind of interweaving where these plants that are from various different climates are all interacting and making an ecosystem that's unlike any other ecosystem. And where else would you find dill with watermelon as a ground cover around it? And mulberries. thornless blackberries. Love lies bleeding. Very weird and cool mix, but all useful, medicinal, or just a few things are just beautiful. But I just love the way it looks. This is really the most beautiful garden you could ever plant. Before we go any further, I want to invite all of you guys over to our school platform. We've got a little kind of private social media site, but I've also posted food forest training courses over there and other exclusive content. And we're going to be putting up some exclusive stuff on the grocery rows over there as well. So if you have gardening questions and you want to build a food forest, or you want to meet other gardeners and all that kind of thing, come join us over on that platform. Seriously, it is very cool so far, and we've got, I think, 46 people over there already, and it is not expensive. So come over and join us. That's school, and I'll put a link below. On this next row here, we are starting with a Chinese chestnut, and then more non-fruiting goji berries with some watermelon climbing over them. This is a dwarf ever-bearing mulberry. It's not my favorite variety of mulberry, but it's very easy to propagate, so we have a lot of them. It does make decent fruit, but they're not very big. It's not super productive. They get better after a couple of years of being in the ground, but there are better varieties of mulberry. This is the Rosa rugosa over here, yet again, another patch of it where we have these beautiful rose hips forming. This would make a really nice barrier hedge around the front of a property, or an informal cottage garden with sprawling roses. The roses don't last very long, but they smell nice and they're pretty, and then they're followed by pretty fruit. Everybody will say, "What's that fruit? That's a weird fruit. What fruit is that?" And you could say, "That's Rosa rugosa fruit." Those are real 100% genuine rose hips. You don't see those every day. Well, you do if you live in a rose garden, but this is Love Lies Bleeding. This is another variety of amaranth. It has edible leaves, but also just has crazy flowers, which are just super fun to look at. And they're probably going to self-seed and show up here forever and ever. I love it. Got our sweet potatoes running through here. We've already pulled some cucumbers out of here. The watermelons now, the sweet potatoes, cucumbers, and then we have a squash. I don't know what we were thinking, but I gave the kids some transplants, and some of them were pumpkin transplants. So this is some winter squash or pumpkin that is just gonna be ridiculous in here. This is a hollyhock, which doesn't look particularly happy. We'll see how it does. Look at, there's another watermelon down there on the ground. There's at least probably 20 watermelons growing in here now. These are the giant white sweet potatoes. More taro. This is a seedling plum. This one I decided to just go ahead and lop up from the ground because I had a cow get in here a couple of months ago and cause trouble. I really should not do it this way. This is bad. But we just need to knock those little shoots off. This is the way to do it. Just pull the little shoots off. So the cow came and chewed up the side of the tree and really kind of messed up the shape of it. So I lopped it up, and it was like, well, now I got all this sunlight underneath. I could grow things underneath it. Maybe we'll get the plums on top, and we'll have something else that grows underneath it next year. And as always, we've got zinnias everywhere in the garden because they're beautiful. This is the flower. This is like, just plant zinnias. If you have a grocery row garden, just plant some zinnias. This is the first of the Jerusalem artichokes starting to bloom. They're very pretty. They actually make nice bouquets, like pretty little daisy flowers. So let's see if we can get my camera lady through here. This is another one of those dwarf mulberries. This is comfrey down here, which is doing pretty good in the shade. I have one comfrey in the grocery row gardens, and this is it. And it dies back if it's in the sun. It's actually looking pretty decent. It really likes it when it's cooler out, but this is not bad for a comfrey here in lower Alabama heat. This watermelon is the largest that we have so far. Look at this big, beautiful watermelon. Again, these are all my son's landrace watermelons that are all crossed up. And I know some of you guys are growing these seeds in your own gardens because my daughter sells them in her seed store. That is my daughter's seed store. That is not my seed store. So Sometimes people will write me and say, oh, I ordered this seed from you and it's doing well, or I didn't, the postal service lost my box or something like that. It's not my seed store, it's my daughter's business. I just love my daughter, so I send people to her business. Every once in a while I have something extra and I'll give it to her to sell, but she runs the whole thing. I don't have anything to do with it other than promoting her occasionally. Here's another pretty watermelon right here. Gorgeous. The colors are very interesting because there are some known varieties that crossed up. Something like 25 or 30 different varieties of watermelons all crossed together, and they're just kind of becoming their own thing. If you haven't seen the landrace gardening concept before or heard of that, Joseph Lofthouse is the man. Go check out Joseph Lofthouse's stuff. Look at this gorgeous thing. What is this thing? I don't even know, because I get flower bulbs and I stick them in here. So we've got some sort of what looks like a daylily here, and then some sort of a tiger lily growing above it. This is two different plants. Those are cool. That is the neatest looking thing I have ever seen. We probably shouldn't try to eat it. It's probably not edible, so we're not going to eat it. We will not eat it. We're going to make a pact with ourselves right now. It looks cool, but we're not going to eat it. We have free will. We can say no. We can say this is not going in our mouths. Even if you really, it just looks beautiful to eat. This next row is so full of watermelon vines that I have little confidence we can make our way all the way through. I mentioned in the Grocery Road Gardening book, if you don't have the little Grocery Road Gardening book, it's inspiring. I think you'll like it. If you want to know how we built it, it's in the Grocery Road Gardening book. But I mentioned in the book that you could really have 4-foot wide pathways. These are 4-foot wide beds with 3-foot wide pathways. But literally at this time of year, it is almost impassable, especially because we plant watermelons and sweet potatoes as ground covers. And the watermelons don't like being walked on. So this is what we got. Watermelons all the way through here down to cassava, and there's more Rosa rugosa, and we're gonna see if we can show you the grapes that are down there on the trellis, but my wife does not want to walk this row, so we're going to try to figure our way out through here. All right, so we have a compromise here. My wife is going to stand at the next row over. So this is real YouTube. These are the mechanics of how things actually work in like the real YouTube world, you know, for influencers and stuff. Sometimes we move things around. It's crazy. It's crazy. But it's kind of like a little behind the scenes. This is galangal. And then I am trying to navigate my way through all of these watermelons. And then I've got some cannas in here, more taro, another fig, more zinnias. And I'm gonna, can you follow me? Is this possible? There's some other Dioscorea bulbifera that you just walked past. That's cool. You guys have seen that before. Beautiful looking cassava that came back from last year. Grab your Dramamine, folks. We're stepping over the vines. Beautiful cassava. Big, beautiful cassava. China wishes they had this cassava. You're gonna get tired of cassava. You're gonna have so much cassava. Still here. You made it. You made it part way. So these are Muscadine grapes that are getting absolutely insane, growing over this trellis, but I've got to show you these vines are less than 2 years old. Look at this. They love Grocery Road Gardens. This is beautiful. We put 2 muscadine vines on this, which is really too much. One of them died back mostly, the other one took off, and it is just going crazy. It's just all grapes. And they don't really usually start producing well until their 3rd year. This is really 20 months or something like that in the ground. I am so happy with this. I did not expect them to do so well. These are from Ison's, I-S-O-N. They're an excellent supplier of southern muscadine varieties. Ison's, I recommend them. That's what pros get. They get Ison varieties for their U-pick grapevines and wineries, etc. So I'm going to try and pass through this and meet you on the other side. This is another Muscadine grape here on the other side. I'm about 10 feet further down. There's a bunch of cassava in between that vine and this vine. This is about 12 feet from the other vine. And I'm trying to grow this one like a tree. So I tied it up to this piece of rebar and grew it straight up, and then I'm trying to keep it pruned back and just see if I could have a grape tree, because it seems like a cool thing to do. And then behind me you'll see we've got another large watermelon forming underneath this trellis. For some reason nothing grew on this side of this trellis, but on this side it's all covered with Chinese yams that I planted last year. I think last year I actually had some cassavas here and they froze to the ground, so they were kind of propping up that other side. This doesn't even have a thing in here. I just stuck it in. It needs a T-post because it shouldn't be doing this. But the Chinese yams don't care, because they just grow and grow and grow no matter where they are. They'll probably grow over your car. I'm not going to take you through the very last path because my wife got hung up on the Kiowa thorny improved variety of blackberry. It's very thorny, not good on long skirts. So we're just not going to go through there. We're just going to end it right here. But anyhow, you get the idea. This garden is gorgeous. It's not that hard to maintain. It's a series of forest edges. You can check out my other videos on this system. You can check out the little booklet. And I've been wanting to show you guys what it looks like, because June here, this time is the peak of how this looks for the year. We're gonna be pulling a lot of roots and other stuff out later. Right now, our main harvest has been eggplants. We already got our white potatoes out of here. We're now getting eggplants, tomatoes, cucumbers, and then watermelon season is going to come in, and we're going to get a lot of watermelons. And there's always a smattering of herbs and berries, and then at the end of the year we get this massive amount of yams and sweet potatoes that come out of here. So it's kind of up and down through the seasons, and there's always greens in here that we can eat and flowers that we can pick for the table. And you can totally do this yourself. It is not hard. I break it down into all of what you need to know and give you all the little pieces both in the booklet, or if you're too cheap to buy my booklet, you can watch my video on establishing a grocery row garden from scratch. And if you like what I'm doing and you want to see more exclusive content and behind the scenes and get more in-depth training, including my food forest course, please come and join the community over at school. You'll find it quite worthwhile. And it's about the same price as a bag of good potting soil per month. So come on over and you'll get a lot of inspiration over there, and I look forward to seeing you on the other side and talking with you directly. We do regular live streams and other things over there at school, and I will put a link below. Thanks for joining me. Catch you next time. And until then, may your thumbs always be